Mr. Ranganathan, Mr. Dempo, Mr. Sahani, Rekha Sethi, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I've been a long time admirer of AIMA and I've been a frequent speaker here. So I'm truly delighted to be speaking here at this valedictory function. I've been asked to speak on the importance of being India, and the changing role of India in G20. So, ladies and gentlemen, these are two very complex issues. The importance of being India and the changing role of India in G20. So let me first dwell on G20. First and foremost, ladies and gentlemen, it's a very fractured world outside. You have the Russia-Ukraine war, which is going on for about last 7.5 months. You have the China-Taiwan crisis. Global supply chains are disrupted. The post-COVID era has seen people go back on sustainable development goals because health, education, nutrition, all have got impacted. Global trade, which has lifted vast segments of population above poverty and has accelerated growth, has got impacted. Global trade will slow down. And global debt is an all-time high. So when the Western world was growing and expanding, global trade was growing, global debt was growing, and they had the luxury of industrializing without carbonizing. So they actually, with carbonizing, and they had actually polluted the whole world while industrializing. India's key challenge will be that we'll have to grow and expand at a time when global trade will slow down. There will be the geopolitical world will get more complex. The global debt will slow down because global debt is already high, very high. And India will have to be the first country in the world. Which will have to industrialize without carbonizing. That is the challenge. Now, G20 is a grouping of 20 leading countries in the world, which account for about 85% of the global GDP. They account for about 78% of the global trade. They account for about 2/3 of the population of the world, and they account for about close to 90% of the global patents. Now, G20 is important because UN is too large and too unwieldy an issue, a platform, and as you've seen even in the Russia-Ukraine crisis, the United Nations General Assembly, its Security Council has not been able to play a critical and an important role. So UN has become an unwieldy body. G7 is a rich man's club. It is too elitist, and in 2009, 2008, it was felt that when the global economic crisis arose, it was felt by the G7 leaders that it is not possible for G7 alone to solve the problems of the world, and therefore it was expanded into G20. Now, G20 covers a lot of emerging markets. It has all the leading countries of the world, but it also has emerging markets. And therefore, it's supposed to be the most powerful grouping in the world. Because it accounts for about 85% of the global GDP. And when a major crisis arises in economic, financial structure, on issues of social progress, etc., G20 has always played a leading role. The challenge right now is that it's a fractured world with the Russia-Ukraine crisis. Indonesia is presently the host of G20. It is finding it extremely complex because the G7 countries are not willing to sit and discuss any issue with Russia, because they say that while G20 is an economic and financial grouping, but the consequences of the war and conflict in Russia-Ukraine also have an impact on global energy. They also have an impact on global food crisis. And therefore, conflict and war have to be the first and foremost issue at this moment of time. That's the view of the G7. View of many others is that issues of war and conflict need to be discussed in the United Nations, and we need to move on with issues of economics, of finance, of growth, of progress, all these issues in the G20. That is the challenge under which India will take over the presidency of the G20 later this year. And the challenge will be that when we take over the presidency, the dollar would have accelerated, it would have got strengthened, inflation would be getting tightened across the world, and therefore you will see recession in vast parts of the world. Recession, global growth will be a key challenge. And therefore, how do you accelerate the pace of growth will be one challenge. The second challenge will be that you will have to bring issues of climate action center stage, because it's important that the world glows with sustainability. While we have not contributed to pollution in the world, we have occupied a very limited space in the carbon space. Our occupation of the total carbon space of 2004 gigatons at 1.5 degrees, only 52 gigatons, which is 1.5%, whereas we are entitled on a per capita basis of 18.5%. But climate action will be center stage, and the third will be because the world has got impacted due to COVID on health, education, on nutrition. The world has actually regressed rather than progressed. How do you accelerate the pace of implementation on many of these issues of sustainable development goals will also be a key challenge. Now, with these challenges, India will have to push the narrative on some of these issues and also push the India narrative. And India narrative is important because we've done some exceptional thing during this period. We have, as you are aware, become the 5th largest economy recently. And we are heading towards being the 3rd largest economy in the world in due course. But it's also important to say that we've done some very exceptional things. We've done exceptional things because if you were to look at the public digital infrastructure that India has created, is very unique. It's unlike the big tech infrastructure which the Western world has created, where data is owned by some leading tech companies. In case of India, we've created public digital goods, individual identity. 1.4 billion people have identity, 1.4 billion people have bank accounts, 1.4 billion people have mobile, what we call the Jam Trinity. And actually, since 2015, 320 million new bank accounts were created. Many of us do not realize this, but this is equivalent to the population of the United States of America. And every second bank account opened after 2015 has been opened in India. And 320 million new bank accounts is twice the population of Russia. So basically, in 7 years, what we have done is equivalent to giving every citizen of United States and twice the number of citizens of Russia with a new bank account. If you were to look at our digital payments, today, India is a leader on real-time transactions. Our total transactions in 2021 were close to about 49 billion. That is 3x of what China does and almost 7x greater than the payments of what USA and China do together. What digital payments of US, China, UK, France and Germany, all these countries, our digital payments are greater than that. There's several remarkable things, and it's important to tell you this because it's not just that we do 3x of China, 7x greater than the combined digital payments of USA, Canada, UK, France and Germany. If you were to look at housing, and under the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, affordable houses have been provided to 30 million Indians, that is 3 crore citizens, and most of them are in rural area. And actually this is equivalent to providing every single citizen of Australia with a new home. Every single citizen of Australia with a new home. And if you were to look at roads, over 50,000 kilometers of highways have been built over 7 years. This is almost equivalent to total road network length of countries combined of Denmark, Taiwan and Czechoslovakian Republic, all 3 countries together. And in vaccination, in gross terms, we've been able to administer over 2.5 billion COVID-19 vaccine doses, which is roughly 6 times the population of the United States of America, 5 times the population of European Union, and 2.5 times the population of EU and USA combined. I'm speaking some of this because the subject given to me was the importance of being India. And it's important to tell you the transformation journey in terms of size and scale of what India has done. And if you look at health insurance, we have the world's largest publicly funded health insurance scheme covering 500 million Indians in the form of Ayushman Bharat scheme. And it covers more citizens than the entire population of the European Union. Entire population of the European Union. And if you were to look at electrification, over 30 million houses have been electrified over the last 7 years. In population terms, that is equivalent to electrifying the whole of Canada. And I can go on and on, but I don't want to dwell on this because it's important to say that India has done transformational work across water, across electrification, across Swachh Bharat, across health insurance, across vaccination, across road, across housing, across LED bulbs. In case of water, if you look at it, 81 million households, 81.1 crore new households have potable water under the Jal Jeevan mission. That means approximately every citizen of Brazil with clean drinking water. That is the level extent of this thing. But the important thing is that this has had a huge transformational impact in rural areas and at the grassroots level, and that should over a period of time, I've been a long-term believer that India has to grow at rapid rates, and India needs to grow despite these challenges which I talked about, despite the challenges of global supply chain, despite the challenge of the Russia-Ukraine war, despite the challenge of a post-COVID era, despite the challenge of global debts. India has to grow at rapid rates, and that is what the Prime Minister has talked about in his Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav. What Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav basically means is that India must transform itself in one generation. In one generation. And if you look around, if you were to look around, you would find that several countries of the world actually have done this. Japan did this between 1956 and 73. Korea has grown at rapid rates and did this between 1980 and 1990. Singapore has done this between 60 and 72, and China has done it between 1995 and 2010. They've all grown at rates of 9 to 10% per annum during this period. Grew at 9 to 10% per annum year after year, year after year, year after year. Now, India has grown at those rates. Let me tell you, India has grown at those rates, but India has grown at those rates for a relatively small period of 5 to 6 years. India needs to grow at high rates of 9 to 10% for a 3-decade period. And if it grows at 3-decade period, we should understand that we'll transform India in one generation. It's also important to understand that while we are the 5th biggest economy in the world, our per capita income is $2,100. And if you were to grow at 6% from now till 2047, you will see that the Indian economy will have a size of about 16.4 million. If you were to grow at about 8%, your economy will have a size of about 20.6 trillion. But if you were to grow at about 10%, the size of the economy will be about close to 32.6 trillion. That is the power of the compounding power of growth. The acceleration you get when you are growing at higher rates is enormous. And that means that from $2,100 per capita, actually if you grow at 10% per annum, year after year, year after year, year after year, you will take the per capita income to about close to $23,000 for every single citizen of India. And that means that you would have transformed the lives of every single citizen of India. And this is very important, that you would have really transformed the life of every single citizen of India. And this is really the key to my mind. Now, it's also important to say that if India is to grow at those high rates, a lot of reforms have been carried out in India in terms of ease of doing business. We've done a lot of radical reforms on scrapping rules, regulation, procedures, paperwork, acts. We've made things simpler. We've jumped up hugely on the ease of doing business. We've brought in the goods and services tax. We've done the IBC, the RERA. We've reduced the corporate tax. Vast number of reforms have been carried out by the central government. My belief is that if India is to grow at those high rates for a long period of time, it's very important that the states of India grow. Because India is a very large country. It's bigger than 25 countries of Europe, plus another 30,000 kilometers. So states need to grow. And if states need to grow, these reforms, these vast reforms which India has carried out, in ease of doing business, on bringing digitization, in actually making things simpler for the private sector to work, in accelerating the pace of growth, has to happen in the Indian states. And therefore, it's important that states like Goa and Sikkim, it's important to understand this, that if you look at India's average per capita income, states like Goa and Sikkim are growing at almost 5x the average per capita income of India. There are states like Gujarat, Maharashtra, which are going at about 2.5x of what India is growing at. But there are states like Bihar, Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, all these states are growing at about 0.4, 0.5% of the average states of India, growth of India. So unless these states need to accelerate the pace of growth, and if these states grow, they will really transform India, and therefore my view is that states will play a very, very critical role in the coming years. And that is the importance of being India. The importance of being India is that we are a federal polity. We are a federation of states. States have to become the champion of growth, and they have to be the key driver of India's growth. And if they grow, it's very important to understand that in India, the share of agriculture is still very high. Agriculture sector contributes about 19% to our GDP, whereas world average is 4.3%. 49% of our population works in agriculture. The worldwide average is about 7 or 8%. And therefore, you need to take people from agriculture and put them into industry and services and in urbanization and ensure that they get better paid wages. That is what has happened in the world. People have moved from agriculture to manufacturing to industry. And therefore, there are three critical things to my mind which is important. First is that we need to build top-class, world-class infrastructure, which is happening across areas. The Gati Shakti plan, the national infrastructure pipeline, the logistic policies are all a culmination of what the government of India is aiming to do by creating top-class infrastructure. The second is that we need to urbanize and we need to do top-class, world-class urbanization in a very sustainable manner. We need to create new cities, which is on the back of public transportation. We need to actually give... Why I'm saying that this is necessary is because we should understand that there are two cities in Japan, Tokyo and Osaka, whose GDP is more than the GDP of Uttar Pradesh. And within Uttar Pradesh, this GDP of Gautam Budh Nagar, one city which is industrialized, Noida and Greater Noida, is 10x more than the second city of Uttar Pradesh, that is Kanpur. So what growth urbanization gives you, nothing else will give you. Good, sustainable urbanization. And that is an opportunity because 500 million Indians are going to get into the process of urbanization in the next 5 decades. And that is a huge new opportunity for India to pole vault in the coming years. The third key challenge for India, as I see it, is that you bring in competitive efficiency. And this competitive efficiency is because I am a believer that India should be driven by its private sector. And that was what the Prime Minister said, that India's growth must be driven by the private sector. The government should act as a facilitator and a catalyst. And Indian private sector must be highly efficient, competitive, and get into sunrise areas of growth, because all the growth will happen in new areas of growth. And the new areas of growth will be electronics, there'll be battery, there'll be advanced chemistry cell battery, there'll be electric mobility. There's a huge disruption taking place. I think we need to think about new areas of growth, all completely new areas of growth which will transform the world. Areas of artificial intelligence, area of digital public goods, area of digitization, areas of industry 4.0. Those will enable you to technologically leapfrog. And those are very, very critical for the world. And our ability to use vast amounts of data that we are already generating through individual identity. What we are doing you should be able to use that data through artificial intelligence, machine learning to find many of the solutions to the problems of India. We've demonstrated both in digital public goods that we can be world class. We are way ahead of the developed world in digital public goods. We established that actually a completely new model of payments can come from India, not from the western part of the world. We demonstrated in our startup movement. In our startup movement, we demonstrated when we started the Startup India movement, there were just 106 startups. Today, we have 78,000 startups in India. We have 107 unicorns in India. So these are people who are disrupting the world, and they are finding a solution to the challenges of India on food supply, on education, on health, on a vast range of new areas, on transportation, many of them. Our challenges are very different from the Western world. The Western world is innovating on driverless cars. India doesn't need that. India needs solution to education, health, nutrition, food supplies, agriculture, productivity, value-added products. And that is what our startups are finding a solution to. And when they find solutions to the problems of India, they are finding a solution not for the 1.4 billion people of India, they are finding a solution for the next 4 to 5 billion people of the world who are moving from poverty to middle class across the world. So the market is huge if you are able to produce and come out with innovative products for the rest of the world. So what India has demonstrated is truly these great examples of startup, these great examples of digital goods, these great examples of individual identity, the great examples of how we have disrupted the world in many of these new areas of growth. And I think that is the narrative. That is the narrative which we would like to put before the world during G20, that there is a model, a different model from the western part of the world, which needs to be emulated. It's not a model of big tech, it's a model of creating digital goods on top of which we've allowed private sector to compete So PhonePe competes with Google Pay, Paytm competes with WhatsApp, Ola competes with Uber. All of them compete in the marketplace, but on top of public goods. And that is what, to my mind, is truly unique about India. So G20 is a unique, a totally unique grouping of the world. It's a very, very powerful grouping. It's the most powerful grouping in the world. We'll see 200 events being held in India in 55 cities across India. That is what the Prime Minister has desired, that we should actually use every single state of India, every single union territory of India, and use this opportunity to really improve our infrastructure across India, bring out the best cultural talent across India, and really demonstrate the best of India. And that is what we'll do during this period. We will use this period to drive global growth. We'll use this period to accelerate SDGs. We'll use this period to really push climate action, but we'll build up a very strong India narrative for the rest of the world to emulate of what we've done in India. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.